My name is Randall Cumba. I am here today interviewing James Creasy for the Gay Spirit Visions partnership with Georgia State University Oral History Project. We're here in Atlanta, Georgia, at my house in Tucker. Our technical person is Solomon, who's managing the camera. So James, tell us your complete name, your full name, your birth name.
No, my birth name is James Arthur Creasy, and the Arthur comes from an uncle of mine that was killed during the Second World War, and the James comes from my father.
Okay. Tell us about your parents, where they met. Well, where were you born and when?
I was born in Florence, Alabama, in a small town in 1947. And more?
No. Your parents.
My parents.
Where did they meet? Where are they from?
Okay. My parents are James Euless Creasy and Nancy Hemington. And Nancy Hemington was an English teenager in 1940s. During the Second World War, living in Eastleigh, England. And my father, James, was in the military as on the American Army, and they met at a church service in England. And the Hemington family had a habit of inviting Yanks home for dinner, Sunday dinner. And my father was invited home, and he met the daughter of the family, and things grew from there. And eventually my father and mother were married, and my father went off to the continent for a year or so, and they didn't see each other for an extended period of time. And then the war ended, and my father went home to the U.S. and he saw my mother for just a few hours one day on his trip from Europe back to the U.S. And they were reunited together back in the States in Alabama, where my father was finally called, no longer called a Yank, which he sort of resented all the time when he was in England, because of the convictions that Southerners have about that term. But at any rate, my parents were met in England during the Second World War. And then I was the product of their getting together again in Florence, Alabama. And I grew up there, went to school, and the college of University of North Alabama eventually, and that's sort of a quick summary of that part of my life.
Okay. Any siblings?
I have two sisters and one brother, and I'm the oldest of the four children. And we had a very nice, peaceful, loving upbringing in the small town of Florence, Alabama, and we were brought up in a church-going family, and were always in Sunday school, and attended church services on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings, and sometimes even on Wednesday evenings.
And what was that faith tradition?
Oh, that was the United Methodist Church. Very middle of the road, not a strong evangelical setting as compared to some branches of Protestantism, but it was definitely a Methodist upbringing.
Okay, good. A little bit more about your brothers and sisters? Your sisters and brother?
Right, well, my two sisters are 2 and 4 years younger than me, and my brother is 10 years younger than I. What can I say about them? Well, they're all still living, and my brother still lives in my hometown where he's retired from the banking industry. One of my sisters was a medical personnel for her life in Huntsville, Alabama. And my youngest sister, she was a child and family counselor living in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay. Tell us about your partnership history.
Relationships with other men? Oh, well, anyway, okay.
All of them.
All of them are, right, yeah. Well, there's the most significant one would be the longest lasting relationship, and that is with a woman. I was in the Army during the Vietnam War, and there was a female technician that worked in a dental clinic in which I was a lab tech and a dental technician. And I met her name was Charlene, and we developed a strong relationship, friendship, bond, and eventually ended up getting married to her. And so for 30 years we were married. I had one child from that union. Her name is Jennifer, and the most wonderful thing that came from that relationship was two things. One is a relationship with the wonderful woman, Charlene, and even though we eventually worked out the reason for some of our problems was the fact that I'm gay, we had a good relationship, and finally were divorced in an amicable relationship, although we all have our problems. And then my daughter Jennifer is the apple of my eye, and I have two grandchildren from her. And so I've experienced family life and having the experience of a birth child, and just enjoyed that. That's sort of given my life meaning, and it still does. When I was a teenager, I had all male friends. I was in the band in high school, and was close to several other guys, but I never approached anything that had to do with sexuality with any of them. And because of the sheltered life that I was raised in, I knew very little about, or hardly anything at all, about homosexuality. And I never dated girls. I didn't have much of a relationship, although my best friend as a child was a girl who lived across the street from my family, and we were best pals for most of our, up through our teen years. When I went away to college, I tried dating with some girls. That was fun and exciting. I got my first kiss from a girl in my college freshman year, so that shows I'm sort of a late bloomer, I would say, since I managed to make it through high school without ever being kissed by a girl in a romantic sense. But I met a young man named John, and we hit it off very well, and we eventually became close enough friends that we began to explore each other and began to explore our sexuality. And it was him that I discovered that I was very comfortable with and enjoyed the closeted gay style of life at that time. Our relationship with each other was physical and emotional, and a lot of really good friendship.
And did this happen in college?
In college years, yeah.
Okay.
When I would have been probably like around 20. maybe 21, 8, 19 years old. I don't remember, that would have been in the years of, let's see, I graduated from college in 1970, so it would have been prior to that.
All right. Any other significant relationships you want to share with us?
Yes, as time went for once I met and married Charlene, all of that was put behind me, and I guess you'd say I went back into the closet. I was more a case of denial than a closet gay. I did not act on any of my gay inclinations, except maybe enjoying seeing pictures of that were stimulating erotically. But that was about the extent of it, until eventually, after I had been married for quite a few years, then it all began to come alive inside of me again, and I'd wake up and I knew there was something different about me all along, but I began to explore it, and I was in a situation where I went to therapy with a psychiatrist for a couple of years, and that was when I came into touch with my own and finally admitted to myself that I was gay. That was a wonderful revelation. Following that, I met and had relationships with a few individuals, but the most important thing was one particular person that I met and fell in love with, and that was where my exploration went far enough that it presented a problem for my married life. And eventually that relationship broke up, and then later, after I discovered GSV, at a GSV meeting, I met someone named Randy, and we had a relationship that lasted about a year of exploration of ourselves, and we were in similar situations in our lives where he had separated from a wife and was divorced, and I, in fact, was still married at the time, but we had I was madly in love with him, and but eventually that relationship didn't work either. It was a long distance relationship. Randy lived in South Carolina, and I was living in at the time we broke up, I was living in Mobile, Alabama. So and things don't last well when you're trying to have a relationship over a long distance.
Okay, thank you. Let's back up a little bit. One or two experiences from your childhood that you believe had a profound effect on your values, personality, or your passions, or the person you are today?
Well, let's see. It's all just seems to me, I can't, I'm not a person that goes into any kind of specific events that I can think of that were, but overall, the continuous relationship with a very kind, loving, supportive father, and also mother, and I think I gained my moral and ethical values from them, and they were good, traditional Christian values. All of them were within the mainline Protestant tradition, and I had a close relationship with a college professor who lived across the street from me, and it was his daughter named Patty, that was my best friend throughout my childhood and in early teen years. I learned how to, and this college professor was very much into science and understood. He was a teacher in this field of different sciences at the local college at the in the town that I grew up in, and he was very interested in teaching me and directing me and my love and understanding of nature and the universe and science, and then in my experiences going to the church, I learned a great sense of the value of community and a loving community that holds you in regard and supports you as a child and as a teenager. And I had when I was in my high school years, I had a friend named Mike who became my best friend at that time. And although we never approached each other in terms of a sexual relationship, I'm pretty sure that now, looking back on it, that my feelings were definitely, I was drawn to him because of my homosexual orientation. And and he was in the same church as I, and we were best buddies, and we were always together and did everything together.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit about your coming out experience, or your transition, if we want to call it that. Can you elaborate any more on the actual coming out experience? And maybe you've covered it, but I just wanted to make sure that we address that.
I guess I'd say my coming out experience, basically, if you want to go to a specific event, relates to my saying to my wife that I was gay. And I had come to that conclusion about myself within myself, within the psychiatric setting of talk therapy with a psychiatrist over a year or so. And one day I was driving to one of my counseling sessions, and I was running over and over through my mind all of what I was going, and all of a sudden I said to myself, and I was in a car all alone, and I think I said it out loud, I'm gay, and it felt really good. And I call that my coming out to myself, because there's no one else that had heard. And I didn't even say that to the counselor when I saw him afterwards. But the next time that I got with him, I did tell him the experience of saying that and whatever. And then to switch to another coming out episode, because I said it had to do with my wife, and that was on one occasion when my daughter was going to college in a small state college in Alabama, and Charlene and I were living in Virginia at the time, and we had taken her to the school for her first year of college. And on our drive back home from North Alabama back to Virginia, which was a long drive, we got into a conversation, and a lot of it, some of it had to do with me, and somehow or other, the conversation went to the point where Charlene said, "I know you better than you know yourself." And I said, "You don't know me that well." And then it turned into an argument. And I finally, in anger, said, "There are things about me that you don't know." And she said, "What?" And then I resisted telling her for hours. And there was a long period of silence as we drove along. And I never, and the long drive, which was many hours, I never did tell her what it was that I knew that she didn't know, or I thought she didn't know. And then when we were home that night, I finally she brought the subject up again when we had gotten in bed. And she said, "What is it? Tell me something about you that I don't know." And it was rather heated conversation, a lot. And I blurted out, "I'm gay." And I don't remember much about after that. It was, but that's how I came out to her. And then it took a few years to work through all of that and get to where I am now, which is 20 years later.
That's nice, thank you. Do you have any relatives or acquaintances, friends or mentors? Were there any events or experiences that helped shape your spiritual journey before attending GSV?
Yes. I would say definitely that my parents, both my father and my mother, both influenced me considerably about my just my spiritual being and the role of spirituality, and God in my life came specifically from that, and the community that I was in the church that I attended as a child and a teenager. That was Northwood Methodist Church in Florence, Alabama. There was one occasion where a very gifted professor was invited to the church to deliver some lectures about the Bible. And he presented some ideas that brought up some controversy within the church and the congregation, but were totally wonderful for me to hear about the ways of looking at the Bible other than a literalistic way. And he opened me up to the critical way of thinking about Scripture, and I'm talking about being a young teenager at this time, and told stories about, he had these scientific explanations of what the parting of the Red Sea could have possibly been, other than just a miracle of the water spreading apart, and what the bread and water miracles could have been in the story of the Exodus out of Egypt. And he just talked about the Bible in a non-literalistic way, which brought together my great love of science and nature, and a consistency that, rather than just the miraculous, which was before then had been part of the. I had a questioning, curious mind, and I could not accept the role of just miraculous things happening by God pointing His finger and speaking the word and it happening. But I had he opened. I don't even remember what his name was now. But I remember he was invited back the following year to speak some more, despite the fact that he was controversial, and I remember following him for several years after that, the things he wrote, and things such as that. When I was at the University of North Alabama in my college years, there was a particular director of the Wesley Foundation, which was the United Methodist Church's program on campus. And he was a very supporting, caring kind of a person, and had a good background in counseling and in spirituality. And I was opened by him in a way that brought me better in touch with my exploration of who I am and spirituality, such as that.
One thing that I know about you that we haven't talked about yet, and you may not want to do that, which is fine, is your profession.
My profession?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mind talking about that. But it's still part of me, although I'm retired. I'm a retired Episcopal priest. When in my years of high school and early college, I was all of my approach and great interests academically were in the field of science and mathematics, and I was sure that I was going to be something like an engineer or some kind of a professor in science or whatever. And I really loved the exploration of science and made my best grades in school in those different courses in science and mathematics. But when I was in college, but all the years that I was in the Methodist Church, I was under the influence of a strong evangelical kind of approach where you are open about your religion and was strongly directed in the direction of spirituality and in a role of leadership in the church as a youth and such as that. And somewhere along the way I made this switch that I felt like I was called to be a pastor or a minister. But I resisted that idea because of I knew I didn't quite agree with the situation of the evangelical presence that was part of the Methodist Church. But I felt like I was called to be someone who helped other people explore and find out open it all up. And I began to explore and go visit other churches. Even though I was very involved in the Methodist Church, I went to other congregations and visited their church services. And there was a particular very significant Episcopal priest at at the parish in Florence, Alabama, Trinity Episcopal Church. And Dr. Mullen was the pastor there. He had been the pastor at that congregation since he had returned from World War II as a chaplain in the military. So he was very strongly a spiritual leader for the whole community, not just the church. And in attending the church services at the Episcopal Church, I suddenly realized that it was that setting in which I was the most comfortable in the organized church. And I began to look more into the institutional aspects of religion. I also was interested in monasticism and considered the possibility of going into, I was still not into the lifestyle of dating and going out with the girls, and it hadn't occurred to me that I'd go out with boys, and I didn't even understand that, even in the early years of college. But it seemed right to me that I was receiving this call into the ministry. And once I discovered the Episcopal Church, I found out that was my home, my spiritual home. So I began to think in terms of how I would redirect my college career and then going to seminary. And and I went and talked with the Bishop of Alabama, the Episcopal Bishop of Alabama, about being a priest. And he told me right up front, this was during the Vietnam War controversy, and he had had an awful lot. He himself had been a chaplain in the military and was still a chaplain in the National Guard. So the bishop was very attuned to the idea of people trying to go into seminary to get out of going into the Army. And he had a rule set up that no one could go to seminary from his diocese to be trying to priest unless they had been out of college and out of the academic setting for at least 2 years, and either been in the military or in settings that showed that they weren't trying to a place to escape from the military and be part of the anti-war movement that was around. And so after I graduated from, the year that I graduated from college was the same year that there was a draft instituted in the American Army military complex, and I was drafted into the Army and served for 2 years in the Army. And then while I was in the Army, I was stationed at Fort Dix in New Jersey, which is where I had met Charlene, my future wife, but also where we weren't very far from Philadelphia, where an Episcopal seminary was located, and I made several visits to that seminary, and decided that I liked what I discovered and learned about the seminary training that took 3 years, and you come out with a Master of Divinity degree, and I eventually decided that I would go to the Philadelphia Divinity School. And then with that, I was discharged from the Army at the end of my 2-year term, and that autumn I went to seminary, and was the Philadelphia Divinity School was somewhat of a high church kind of a seminary, and it was not your typical school that a seminarian from Alabama would go to. But my bishop, the same man who had made sure that I didn't avoid the draft by going into seminary, which was a possibility for some people. Anyway, he liked the idea of me going to this particular school, and so he helped provide me with some funding and stuff to go to seminary through the church provided. So, and I came out of the seminary, and in 1974 I was ordained as a deacon in the Episcopal Church, and the first church that I served in as a deacon pastor was in my hometown of Florence, Alabama, at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church. And then as my career continued, I moved and progressed up through various parishes, different sizes, and I've ended up living. And when I was still in the Methodist Church, but thinking of going into the ministry, I thought that one of the things that I disliked about the Methodist Church was the fact that they changed ministers so often. Their ministers would be moved on about every 4 years. And I thought, well, I don't like this. It's one of the things I don't like about the Methodist Church. And as it turned out, then when I had become an Episcopalian and then entered the ministry through the Episcopal Church and started my career, after my career had been in progress for several years, I looked back at my progress of moving from one church to the next and calculated it out, and I moved on an average of every 4 years to another church, either trying to find a better salary or a larger place to serve or something that was more satisfying than the situation that I was in. But and I've lived in, let's see, I lived in Florence, Alabama, pastors in then I went to Prattville, Alabama, then I went to Guam as a missionary, and then I came back to the States and served as an associate pastor at a church in Griffin, Georgia. And then after leaving there, I went to Miami, Florida, and was the associate pastor of a large Episcopal church in Dade County, Florida. And then after there for a few years, then I ended up going to Marion, Virginia. And then from Marion, I was called to be the pastor of a church in Bedford, Virginia. And then I eventually moved back to Alabama when I had in sight the possibility I'd be retiring in a few years, and I was looking for a place to retire. and stay there until I retired. But the last place that I served was in Alabama, was the church in Opelika, Alabama. By then, I was beginning to boil inside about my sexuality, about who I was, and I had this. I know now that it was like a dam inside of me, and it was gonna, and the pressure behind the dam was getting bigger and bigger, and I was gonna have to get out and come out and be who I really was, and that process. And I had some close friends within the church community and some other people that I felt confident enough. I came out as gay in a limited sense. I was still married, but I came out as gay to family and friends and a couple of church members. And I came out, made a mistake, and became philosophical, political enemies with one of the female parishioners, who knew that I had told her that I was gay, and in the middle of a church meeting, she stood up and said, "The problems that this parish has are that Father Creasy is gay." And this was a meeting in which a lot of people of the church were present, and it only takes a few people that most people were perfectly okay with that. Well, not perfectly okay as it turned out, but I would have probably, they would have been happy living with keeping it a secret. Don't ask, don't tell. But once it came out, and it resulted in me eventually needing to resign that position, and I was so close. I was only 2 years from retirement, and I was so angry and upset with what was going on in my life that I wasn't really able to go on in the ministry at another congregation, because I was not happy with myself and within my setting. And so I got out of the parish ministry and took a secular job with the District Attorney's Office in Jefferson County, Alabama, where I was called the Victim Service Officer, and my role in Bessemer, Alabama, was that of working with people who were the victims of crimes and helping them in various situations, whatever the state could do, or and the county could do to help people who were the victims of crimes.
So we're going to move to GSV in a second, but I want to circle back around, and we've kind of talked a little bit about your childhood and your family relationships, a little bit about your spiritual journey. Is there anything that perhaps you want to add to that at this point that perhaps we didn't talk about or you hadn't mentioned?
Well, I don't really think there's anything else additional that I went over. I mean, we could always talk forever. It might come up again anyway.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to GSV, which is part of the reason we're here. Who first told you about GSV, or how did you first hear about it?
Okay. I learned about GSV in a very miraculous way. One of those things you can't explain except that somehow the Spirit is really working. In the years of while I was working for the in the Victim Service Ministry, I had been, and also in the last few years of my ministry in the church in Opelika, Alabama, I became involved in working with PFLAG and was exploring my own self again. I've always been a person who was into their spirituality and navel gazing and all such as that. And I found a book called, well, it was a book written by Christian de la Huerta. What the Bible really says about homosexuality. I think that's what that book was called. And
I think his was Coming Out Spiritually.
yeah, Coming Out Spiritually. That's the name of the book, right? And it was a very, very helpful book. It's the book I would say, you know, with the one that when somebody asks you for the name of a book to read, it's the book I say, you read this book. Maybe there's probably lots of other books that are as helpful or maybe more helpful, but that's the one that I found and was influential in my own life and spoke to me. And so that's the one that I recommend, Coming Out Spiritually. And this was in, let's see, this was, how many years ago was this now? Probably like around 2000, year 2000, 2003, maybe somewhere in there. But anyway, I read the book, and it really touched me and moved me in a lot of ways. And then while I was living in Birmingham, Alabama, as the victim service officer, that job was unfunded by the state system. And I was told that that the funding would run out at a certain date, and I would no longer have a job with the county. And so I was beginning to wonder about what I would do next and where to go and whatever. And then that job came to an end, and I was unemployed anywhere. And one Saturday morning, I was painting the porch of my house. The rented house that I was living in. I helped pay the rent by doing maintenance on the house. And my cell phone rang, and when I picked it up and said hello, the person there said, James, this is Christian de la Huerta. I've been led to give you a call. And I said, who? And he said, I'm Christian de la Huerta, the author of Coming Out Spiritually. And I said, oh, that's a book that was very influential to me. How did you get my name? Well, it seems like it turns out that in the back pages of the book where there's information about the author and stuff like that, there was also a place where you get a website. And I had gone to the website, didn't even remember at the time doing so, and there was a place to fill in for information about yourself and what you're interested in, and I had put my name on there as a list, but I'd never, for a couple of years, I'd never heard anything back from it or whatever like that. So, but apparently he was the author of the book and had seen the list and had it, and he was trying, and he said, I'm calling to invite you to attend one of my seminars, one of my workshops, and I'm doing one in this summer at a conference center in northern New Jersey, and I would like for you to be there, and you're supposed to be there. And I said, well, I'm in Alabama, and he said, well, I live in California, and I said, and this was still when I was reeling with the idea that somebody had just called me out of the blue from California and I was in Alabama, and he wanted me to go to a conference in New Jersey, and I was without a job, and I had no idea what was going on. And I said, well, I've just lost my job, and I'm looking, it's got to put most of my work into trying to find a new position. He said, well, we don't worry about that. Don't worry about the cost or stuff like that. I find that those kind of things work themselves out. And to begin with, I have a scholarship, the partial scholarship, that we'll use towards the fees of it, so you'll be okay with that. I want you to commit yourself to come to this to this retreat that I'm conducting, and and then he explained what it was, but it's on breath work, and I don't know, we don't have time to go into all about what breath work is, but it was a 4-day retreat at a conference center in northern New Jersey, right up there on the line between New York and New Jersey. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get up there, go that far, and afford to pay for all this, but okay, I'll sign my name on there. I may never show up, but since you're insisting that I do this, I'll go along with you. And it wasn't long after that my father-in-law, who was getting on in years, who lived with my wife, who I was still married to at the time, even though we'd been separated for some years, but we were still legally married. But we had worked our way through to, we were friends in communication for various reasons. And it turns out that my father-in-law had been born and raised and grew up in New Jersey. And that he had been away and not been home for years. And he wanted very badly to go to New Jersey and visit some family. And it turns out that he ended up allowing me to use his car and drive him to New Jersey, to Bordentown, New Jersey, and drop him off there. He paid for all the gasoline and the meals on the way, and we spent the night in a motel trying to get up there. And then I took his car and drove to North New Jersey. I don't remember the name of the community where it was, where the retreat place took place, but and I spent 3 wonderful days with Christian de la Huerta and his partner in this breathing retreat, breath work he called it. And while I was there, in a conversation we had individual time when we did spend a lot of time just visiting and getting to know each other. Christian found out that I was from Alabama. Well, he said, "Have you ever heard of gay spirit visions?" And I said, "No, I've not. What is that?" And he said, "That would be really something I think that you would benefit a lot from. And it's it's down there where you live. It's centered there." And I was I think he was had been the keynote speaker, or took place in part in some workshops that GSV had done. And I didn't even know what GSV was or anything about it at the time. And he said it's they have these annual conferences, annual retreats at the mountain. They go to the mountain, and I think it'd be the perfect thing for you to go to next. And I said, "Where's the mountain? What is it? Is it something that happens at Stone Mountain?" I had no idea where that had to do with Atlanta. And he said, "Well, it's near the mountain. The mountain, it's near Atlanta." And he didn't really, in his mind, he didn't really even know. And from living in California, I guess it would be near the mountain. And anyway, he talked it up and told me enough about GSV, Gay Spirit Visions, that I did after I came home from that retreat that I attended. That was very, very, that had a lot to do with opening me up to myself, and the breath work was very helpful experience. I explored, got in touch with GSV, and ended up signing up for the fall conference. Well, it turns out that the mountain was up in North Carolina, and then having was living in near Montgomery, Alabama, and in Opelika, it seemed like to me that he didn't know what he was talking about. He said the mountain was near Atlanta, but anyway, I was accepted and came up with to go to the conference, and I think that was like in the year 2006. I think that's when that was. It might be 2000. 7 or 5 or something like that.
Was there anything else going on in your life at that time that you haven't talked about that made you receptive to going?
Well, the whole big thing that was opening up in my life, I was needing to explore my my sexuality and my spirituality, and because of the trauma that took place in me, I say that I resigned from the church. I was basically forced to resign, so I was fired. And I was filled with a lot of anger and questions, and trying to understand myself, and wanting to blossom, wanting to grow, and figure it all out. So all of that was going on at the time that led me to and Christian's telephone call just seemed, even though I said that I left the Methodist Church because I didn't want to have to deal with all the miraculous kind of ideas and concepts of fundamentalist literalists, it did seem like I've learned since then that the Spirit does work in mysterious ways, and so the way these mysterious things happened, the person who needed to drive to New Jersey seemed to be a good way of proof that this is something that's supposed to happen because it's happening.
So, what do you remember about your first conference? And so many of the people we've interviewed, they all kind of mush together, but
You're right. Well,
and so that may
true.
be, which is fine. But
No,
if
but I
there's
do
anything you
remember
can
some distinct things about the first conference. One of them being that I drove up there from Opelika, Alabama. Was that where I went? No, from Birmingham, Alabama. And when I drove up to the mountain, I arrived late, and the conference had already begun with the first meal of the event, and nothing particularly had really happened, but it would have been nice to have arrived a little bit earlier, just have time to unpack and settle in. But I didn't, and I walked straight into the dining hall, and there was this strange-looking woman sitting next to an empty seat, and the only empty seat that I could see in there after I'd got my plate and everything, and I wondered where I could sit down. And there were all these men in there, but there was this strange-looking woman with a dress on and long hair and a little masculine-looking, but anyway, so I took that seat because it was the only one available, and I could tell there was some kind of a strange conversation going on when I sat down. So I just listened, and she introduced herself as Cassandra, and I turned out to be the strangest, most interesting person that I ever met. And she was a poet, and she quoted some of her own poetry, and it made wonderful sense. And I don't even remember the conversations and stuff that went on. But it turns out that this Cassandra was one of the guys who had been in GSV for many years, or maybe one of the founders, I'm not sure. Turns out that if I was supposed to, and I thought, what in the world have I gotten myself into? This is going to be this is strange. Do I really want to be here? And so that's the main thing I remember about my first conference.
Can you recall your sort of thoughts or feelings as you were driving up?
Well, there was a questioning about why am I doing this? What shall I do? What's going to happen? And but I was okay about it. No, I don't recall any negative or positive particular feelings one way or the other. I must have felt good enough about it that I kept going, driving. And I didn't know who I was even going to be, because I had not even been to any meetings of the GSB before that. I didn't even know that they had these monthly potluck suppers at the time, and I didn't even know about those. I just knew about the GSV, which held a conference, and was centered. The organization had its center in Atlanta, but that they did these conferences at the Unitarian Conference Center in the mountains, and I was ready to get away and go to the mountains. So I was open for that, and throughout my ministry, the experience of various retreats and events, especially in North Carolina. I've been to a conference center not far from there called Canoga, and some other kind of retreats. So I was looking forward to the event. I like going to those kind of events. They're always turned out to be. I'm a person who always gets the positive stuff out of whatever you get involved in. And I was feeling adventurous, and I was feeling a need for escape, and I got it.
Coming from the clergy, you're probably very, very familiar with rituals.
Yes.
And GSV has a lot of rituals. What was sort of new to you or different, or your thoughts about the rituals that were there? That you experienced during your first time there, or maybe a couple times after that.
Well, the next event after the meal with Cassandra was the gathering around the fire and building the fire, and there was a period of time we had to wait for it to get dark, and we went to the area where some of the men were building a fire and setting up for the, was there a name for that that ritual where we light the fire?
The fire ritual.
I don't remember if there's a name for it or not, but anyway, that was the first thing I encountered. And I have always been very interested in ritual, in drama, liturgics. And one of the things that brought me into the Episcopal Church from the Methodist Church was that it had a much greater ritualistic life for its worship and such as that. And it had a history and a tradition that went on. But I've always been one who liked to explore various religious traditions. And already my spiritual life was very eclectic, and I had taken courses even from when I was in college on the world religions, and I particularly found an interest in Hinduism and Judaism and elements of all the other religions. And when I was in college, one of the first girls that I dated was a Jewish girl. And I had gone with her to the Reformed Jewish synagogue on several occasions and got acquainted with the rabbi. And he took interest in me, and he was a sort of a counselor to me over the next few years while I still lived in Florence, Alabama, where he was. So I failed to mention him in the influential people in my life, but his name was Rabbi Gallagher. Sounds like an Irish name to me, but anyway, and he was a Reformed Jewish rabbi. So yes, all the ritual, but my interest in ritual was very, very high. And so I had always had a strong interest in the Celtic spirituality, and not just Celtic Christianity, but Celtic spirituality pre-Christian, and I had been reading on it. And I had a book that I read that summer that I was reading the book when I went up to the Breath Conference work with Christian de la Huerta. Was Mists of Avalon, which is a fictional work, of course, of the story of King Arthur told from the perspective of a woman, but it was full of Celtic spirituality aspects. In a way, it was a very good book. It's like the book has turned out to be, for me, like what the Old Testament is to a Christian. The stories and myths and mythology of the ancient religion, and so and it was just a mind-boggling concept, idea opened up to me as I explored the different religions, how much commonality there is in things that what the Native Americans believed in their rituals that are done around a fire, which was part of the GSV experience, how that meant so many little elements and tidbits of the spirituality were common between the ancient Celts in Ireland and southern England and in Europe, and with the Native Americans' spirituality in the New World, and how and then as I learned about things about the Aztecs and what little is known about the South American Indians and the spirituality, all of that was was amazing to me.
So did the rituals at your first conference, or the first couple conferences, did the rituals feel somewhat familiar to you? Is that what I was trying to say?
Yes. Yeah, it was just exactly what I wanted to do. And it was enough of a difference and change and ripped away from the traditions of the Christian church that I had no problems whatsoever. I was a bit angry at that time with the Christianity, so I didn't have any trouble with looking at other places for source. But I had this great need for ritual in my life.
Did the was there any ritual that particularly stood out to you during that first conference?
Well, other than I remember the fire ritual at the beginning and putting it out, and then at the end, shutting it down, and how everything sort of centered around that fire in the fire pit, and then from that. But and that continuous process of calling the names of the directions of the compass, north, hail, great spirit of the north, and hail, great spirit of the east, and those kind of things. That resonated with me with an experience that I'd had a few years earlier with a Native American event that I had attended some years earlier. Actually, that was in Phoenix, Arizona. It was the Episcopal Church had a national conference, and I was one of the delegates that went to this conference from Georgia, and no, it wasn't Georgia. It was from Virginia. That's where it was from, and They had a Eucharist, the Christian communion service, but it was this event was all sponsored by the Hopi Indians and the Navajo Indians, and the opening ceremony included a calling of the directions before the service started, and it wasn't done in. It was watered down considerably, so it didn't offend the evangelicals, which it did anyway. But it introduced that element which I had not experienced to the degree that it did there. And also I had discovered along the way that there's something very similar to the calling of the directions in the Celtic spirituality of the pre-Christian spirituality of Europe. The importance of the north, south, east, and west is a part of the archetypal imagery that humankind holds.
Any other memories of the first conference?
Well, yes, I remember that we had these massage in the total nude, and that was a wonderful experience of standing around with all these naked guys, being able to give each other massages. That was a lot of fun. And liberating,
I'm sorry.
and
Go ahead.
spiritual.
Go ahead.
No, that's all I was going to say.
Okay. I assume there was a small group.
Yeah, there was a small group.
Remember anything about that?
I remember that Gary Kaufman was the leader of the group, and that he was very, I remember a lot about his personality, which was very strong and forthwith. I did a lot of talking, much as this, in that it was a perfect setting for me to begin to explore and see what it was and also it's the discovery that other men have this same longing and crying out from within to reconnect with the spirit through their sexuality, and not as trying to divorce one's sexuality from one's life in order to be spiritual, but that it's part of our lives, and it's through that we connect with the spiritual. And I discovered that quite a few gay men had a much more negative experiences in their upbringing, and such as that, everything from being abandoned by their families, or having encountered violence and negative physical experiences with homophobes and such as that, which I had not really truly. My experience was pretty peaceful and calm compared to what some people's had. I also discovered that there was a background of drug abuse and alcoholism that played a role in a lot of men's backgrounds of either escapism or trying to find the answer. Of course, life and I had not had that particular element in my own life.
So what did your first conference feel like? We kind of talked about your memories of it. Can you recall sort of a word that you might put to that, a feeling type of word? What did it feel like to you, your first conference?
It was scary, but my sense of adventure was much stronger at that time, and I was ready to meet the challenge, and so it was very fulfilling to have that. I can't now remember who all the people were that I met, other than I met Randy Johnson there, come to think of it, I realize now, or was that the second year? Maybe that was the second year that I went to the one, when I met Randy, because we, and it was finding community. I felt all alone, and if I wasn't the only person in the universe who this was all happening to, I was pretty near the only one. But this opened up the idea that there were lots of other gay men out there who were all hidden away and not being able to do anything about it. I felt born again.
Was it any different than what you expected? Can you recall?
No, I had no idea. I really had no idea what to expect. There's enough similarities in the retreat experience with the retreats that other religions have to have given me. I've already had some things. There was commonality with it that was satisfying enough to know that I wasn't jumping off a cliff into oblivion.
Okay. Any other, so we're kind of I'd like to move from your first conference to all that you've attended. Do any of them particularly stand out over the years that you've been attending in any way, or any part of those that you've attended that stand out that you'd like to share with us? Memorable conferences or memorable parts of a conference.
Well, like I mentioned it a moment ago about I met and basically I met at the dance Randy Johnson, who became a lover for a while of mine, and that stood out as really long, and he's still very much a part of me, and he still has a special place in your heart. You know that even all of your lovers have a place in you never lose them, even if you move on in life and are not together. I remember the conference that Clyde Hall was the keynote speaker was very significant to me, and I remember spending time with him. And then since then, I've stayed in touch with Clyde Hall. He was a Native American gay man, two-spirited man, who shared much of the traditions of the Native Americans with GSV, and so I learned and saw there the connection with the Native American spirituality that I had been enjoying exploring in the Celtic background and other religions in the world. I can't think of any others. Every year the keynote speakers have been, filled me with a lot of interesting things to continue on my study and exploration of the spirit.
About how many conferences have you attended?
Let's see, I've missed the last two annual conferences. And
the fall.
At the fall, yeah, the fall conferences. Prior to that, I had gone to all of the ones from the years that I started. And I think that was in 2006. So however the many numbers is, if you do the math, you'll know how many conferences I've attended. And it's 2018 that's going on right now. I'm missing this one, and I missed last year's. And a lot of that has to do with things that were going on in my life, and changes and stuff that going on. I had gained significantly what I had needed from GSV to bring me to a point where I didn't feel like I was starving to death by not going to one of the events.
Any favorite activities at the conference that are, activities that go on?
Well, my favorite activities
that you look forward to?
My favorite activities have always been the rituals that take place, or which we do, whether they were simple little things that involved a lot of sharing, the big gathering where you pass a talking stick around and everybody, and you get your butt's getting really tired of waiting for 150 people to share their story of why they were reborn, against the idea of, wow, this is just wonderful and mind-blowing and wonderful experience going on. And several times there were rituals that were brought in that were outside the normal context. I know a couple of years ago there was was more than a couple, must have been like 3 years ago now. The Wiccan ritual was done in the main part for Mabon, and my friend Patrick Stevenson participated and was one of the leaders of that event, along with Michael Chavez, who is a priest in or a witch. He's a witch, official witch of the Wiccan background. I remember that particular ceremony was significant.
In a few minutes, I'm going to give you a list of brothers that have passed. So excluding those, which we'll have a chance to talk about it at length if you want, is there someone at a conference who was particularly memorable, someone you've kind of really bonded with over the years? You mentioned Clyde Hall, but anybody else that...
Well, there's individuals that not necessarily speakers that I bonded with. Several of most of the people who live in a lot of people who live in Atlanta became good friends. You mean to name some of them?
Oh yeah,
sure. Like I met Paul Plate and Craig Cook were people that I became acquainted with at the conferences, and then continued to stay in contact with, and then I eventually met and got bonded with. After going to the conferences, I started attending the some of the monthly potlucks that take place, and those were very significant. And I look forward to coming to Atlanta, and the first one I came to, I went over there on a Saturday and was going to drive home, which was a 2-hour drive home when it was over with, and several people insisted that I not drive back, but stay in town, and Paul Plate made that possible for me to stay at his house, and then I've made connections with some other people, and then one of the people that invited me to stay at their home was Duncan Teague, and I've gotten to know Duncan, and then I discovered that Duncan was in the process of going towards being ordained as a Unitarian minister, and he and I shared a lot in that experience, which was not exactly the Christian experience of being ordained and going through seminary, but close enough. And his own influence of being raised a Baptist was definitely made it. Well, anyway, there was a lot of similarities that we explored together.
Okay. So I happen to know that you've been involved in the planning process. We've worked on that a little bit together.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, or any other, I don't know your experience prior to the time that we started working together, but if you were doing any planning work before we met, and share that, and then maybe any other things that you've done, as well as, the work we did together on the ritual committee.
Well, over the years, well before when I was in the church, but before I was involved in the gay spirit visions things, I've always been involved in institutional planning and support groups and things such as that. And there was a period of time when I was the chairman of the liturgical committee of the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia, and I ended up being responsible for planning a major liturgical event, a big celebration for the Diocese of Southwestern Virginia, and so I'm familiar with the process of planning and those kind of things, carrying them off, and what the pitfalls and downfalls could be. And let's see. Some of my most negative experiences have come from the planning also, and it has to do with the conflict between people and the communication over long distances, which is always a struggle to try to make up, and then the power plays that people, you never escape from those negative things about human institutions that can be disruptive and destructive. And so when people are their own personalities and our own needs and desires get in the way of the larger group, it can be a frustration. And the last time I was really involved with the GSV planning thing, that ended on a negative note for me, because I felt, but there were other things going on in my life as well outside, and I was torn between trying to deal with issues of my own personal issues and what was going on within the group, and there were dynamics. The group dynamics were negative, and I finally had to get out of it to save my soul.
Okay. Do you recall any favorite small group experiences that were memorable?
Well, my very first small group is memorable, because that was when I said that Gary Kaufman was the leader of the group. It's interestingly, he'd end up being the leader of 3 different small groups that I've been in over the years. So he and I come back together several times. But the way of drawing, the opportunity to draw out from within and share my own personal experiences with other men who it turns out have had similar experiences and had those same longings inside, needing a fulfillment, and the hurts and pains and the sufferings and the joys that we have. Not just small groups, but with the workshops and gatherings with people. The exploration of physical sexuality has been a very blessing to me, and learning to be more open about who I am, and ways of pleasing oneself, and self-pleasuring, and communicating with each other, and the ways and learning about boundaries and ways to protect each other at the same time of opening up in the most intimate ways with one another. Those are aspects of it, and relating that to spirituality. It's not as if there's one and the other, but they're both all really part of the same thing.
Have you ever felt uncomfortable at a conference? And if so, why?
Yes, there have been times when I felt uncomfortable, and times when I was ready to go home before it was time to go home. But I can't right offhand remember specific events or anything like that. And I'm always trying to, get the best out of what's possible. I always think positively.
Is there anything that you've taken from GSV that you've incorporated into your life?
I'm sure there are, and I guess the use of ritual. I have incorporated the use of ritual that I learned in that gathering into my own personal situation or other kinds of gatherings. I know on one occasion that I was working with we were doing at the Auburn University, the Spectrum organization was having a vigil after commemorating something, I don't remember what at this point, and we had a vigil on the steps at the university of the main building, and organizing the gathering, and I knew it was going to be a group of very eclectic gathering of different people from different spiritual traditions and people without any spiritual tradition at all, and was able to call on the aspects of what I'd learned in GSV and the eclectic background that GSV has.
Have you been a part of other gay organizations, and if so, what do you see any significant differences between those and GSV?
Well, yes, I've been in part of some other organizations, and one of the organizations was called Integrity, and it was a group of and among gay people within the Episcopal Church. And for several years I was a board member on that organization, and we have taken part in gatherings where we brought in keynote speakers for that organization to have conferences or retreats. And then I also was involved in PFLAG, and that's not entirely of just gay people. It has to do with friends and family and of gays. And I was involved in the leadership of that for a few years. And I see lots of similarities between the organizations, and between that organization and organizations like the church in general, how the commonalities are in the negatives as well as in the positives for lots of institutions and organizations that human beings try to work together in.
Any significant differences between those organizations?
Well, yes, on one hand there's more openness towards the eclectic or diversity within the gay groups than within, say, a Christian, specifically Christian group. But I can't think of anything right now on my hand right now.
That's fine.
Just about talked out here.
Got a few more.
Okay.
How have the conferences changed over the years?
Well, I don't know if it's because I just became more comfortable going from having the experience and then coming back again and having it again. I don't know if it's from my personal insideness, but the conferences seem to change to be less intense. But it's probably because I personally was not in the conflict that I was in when the very first ones that I participated in came to me. I also discovered that GSV is like any other human institution, and carries a lot of the same kind of problems that human beings have in working together. That was the commonalities.
What do you value most about GSV?
A structured opportunity to have made contact with other gay men. The close bonding that's taken place between me and several people. Some of them still continue, and others I lost contact with, but a short time. For friendship and intimacy, sexual exploration, sexual expression, and spirituality exploration. Those are all that are important to me and stay with me, and that I carry over into my outside life.
What advice would you give to someone who was going to attend their first conference or thinking about it?
Be open-minded and prepared for things that you didn't expect, but don't be afraid. It's a safe place, and that you can open up or close up as much as you want. You don't have to share something if you don't want to. It's a very caring, loving environment. Be prepared for some disagreement and listening and hearing views or ideas or concepts or activities that you've never heard of before, or that conflict with what you may have done or experienced in the past. And also know that you're going to find a lot of love and companionship, self-revelation, and you'll be a wonderful, much more wonderful person after you've experienced it than when you come, and even the struggles are important.
Thanks. So let's wrap this section up with, is there anything that we haven't talked about GSV that is important to you, that perhaps I didn't ask the question, or that you recall that you may want to share?
Nothing's on my mind at this point that we need to go back and revisit or visit for the first time.
Okay. Before we look at our list, I was remiss in asking you about, my friend Cal calls it your herbal name. Typically it's referred to as a fairy name or whatever.
I call it my spirit name.
Your spirit name.
Yeah,
okay.
in fact, I was thinking of doing that before. Trisk,
Okay.
Trisk, and lots of people or men within the organization have a I could use the term spirit name, but the herbal name, or a name that you have before you come into the group, or that's given to you after you're in the group. And my name came from among the variety of things that I was interested in was a little the Triskelion is what the word Trisk comes from, and it's a symbol that caught my attention. I became fascinated with it and maybe obsessed. And I got on a shirt right now with a Trisk right in the middle. I don't know how that shows up, but. And it's a symbol, a Celtic symbol of the triple goddess. But it has so many, it's been used in so many other ways as well as a Trinity symbol. And it fits in with, even within the Christian tradition of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But it's become a symbol of the swirling spirals, and the spiral is a very significant symbol within humankind. One of the oldest symbols that we have developed for communication. A symbol of the source of life, a symbol of the womb, a symbol of activity and emotion and movement, and into the spiritual realm. So just one day, while I was, after I'd become very interested in the Triskelion and had worn one on a thing around my neck that had Triskelion or a Trinitarian kind of thing, I was so fascinated with it that people always seem to associate me with that symbol. And one day it just occurred to me that if I was to take a spirit name, it should relate to the Triskelion. And so I just James the Triskelion, and then I thought, well, Trisk. So that's where my name comes in. So within the meetings and gatherings of gay spirit visions, I've been known as Trisk.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to move into the list of brothers that are deceased. It's quite a long list.
Yeah. 53 people are listed. These are all people that have passed away?
Yes. Yes. So what we're looking for here, Trisk, is maybe a physical description of them, any favorite or a memorable story about them, anything that would help us put a picture together of these individuals, because they're not here to tell their story themselves. So all of these put together might help us kind of get a sense of who these individuals were. Also, if they had some influence in your life in any way. So just read through them and pick them one at a time, or as many as you want.
You don't want me to read the names out loud, do you?
No. Just pick the ones that you want to talk about.
Well, I mean, it's 53 people on the list, and the vast majority of them I don't recall at all.
That's fine. Yeah, but the ones you do, just
And being involved, some of these go back many years and passed away before I was even on the scene. So I don't know those. There's some people there that I've heard of because their names come back up, even because people have other people hold them as significant. But I won't speak on those. If I do, to tell you the truth. I think that well, to tell you the truth, only one person whose name pops out at me as that I knew that had influence on me was Martin Isganitis, who was better known by the spirit name of Tree Walker, and he was very kind and supportive of me individually over the years that I knew him, and I communicated with him individually as well as just within the group context. And I grew to love him and really appreciate a lot about him. But I can't see any other names of people that stand out. I was not intimately involved with the gay spirit visions between the conferences because I didn't live in Atlanta, and most people either did or that's the only place that they were all in common together where I would see them. Lots of individuals.
Do you recall meeting any of those at a conference?
Any of the other people? There was George Smith.
That are on the list, yeah.
Yeah, Phoenix Smith.
What do you recall about him?
Oh, he was very. When I found out that I heard that he died, it was a shock. He was a very flamboyant, out there, kind of a live person, and I had a hard job, dealing with the fact that he was no longer around.
What did he physically look like? Do you recall?
He's a beautiful black man with a nice physique. He dances beautifully, is very expressive with his body, and does it well with as least clothes as possible. But he was also very artistic and creative and expressive in other kind of ways as well. John Stowe. That was somebody that took me by great surprise when he died. I think if I think of the right person, he was but I don't. I mean, I just one. I was at when I was at some kind of a ritual that we all had. He would happen to be present. He shared with us he had cancer. I think that's who I'm talking about. But I don't have I'm not a good one for remembering people of these.
Okay. All right.
That sort of covers it.
That does. All right, we're finished unless there's anything else that you think that we need to add to this story.
Well, I thank you for relieving me of my anxieties about doing this and leading me through the conversations, and I'm also appreciative for Solomon, who's been behind the camera the whole time, sitting over there, trying not to yawn too much as I bored you all with my mumbling on. And but anyway, fine.
Thank you.